Most of us haven't had the privilege of going to the land of Israel and being able to walk in the places that are recorded in history, in the Bible, and actually imagine what it would be like there. What we're going to be doing in the next couple of minutes is taking a virtual tour. As best we can, we're going to try to re-experience what it was like for those early people in the land of Israel. We're going to be looking at some maps, and I'll be talking you through that. And then we'll also be looking at some pictures. Now, unfortunately, we don't have pictures of what it was like 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, but we know enough of what it was like to be able to recreate those sort of scenes. So first of all, let's have a look at the map of a general Middle East. What we have in front of us is a satellite photo of the Middle East. One of the first things you notice is there is very little green. Most of the Middle East is desert or very close to desert. The two main areas that you notice straight away that have lots of vegetation are the Nile and the Nile Delta, and Mesopotamia, which has the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. It's no coincidence that these two areas were the center focal points of two great civilizations that developed. The Egyptian civilization developed along the Nile, and the Assyrians and Babylonians developed in Mesopotamia. For civilizations to develop and flourish, they need a constant supply of water. The Nile and the Euphrates and Tigris provided those constant supplies of water for those two great civilizations. In contrast, if you notice the land of Israel, it is a tiny, tiny little land, squeezed between a sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and desert. Yes, it does have the Jordan River, but it relies heavily on rainfall. If the rains don't come, then the crops fail, and then there's severe famine in the land. The next thing you notice when you're looking at this map is that you have a large band of mountains that cover the north. This band of mountains is part of the great continental divide that stretches from Europe all the way through to the Himalayas in Asia. Between the mountains in the north and the deserts elsewhere, it really hems in the peoples into a particular area called the Fertile Crescent that stretches from the Nile River all the way to Mesopotamia in sort of an arc or crescent type shape. Anchored at both ends are the great civilizations of Egypt and the great civilizations in Mesopotamia, the Assyrians and then the Babylonians. Squeezed between the two is Israel. So if these great civilizations wanted to control the known world at the time, they would need to conquer Israel. All the way through the Israelite history, Israel has been in a very precarious situation. In a sense, the meat in the sandwich between these two great empires. Now let us zoom in a little bit to look at the land of Israel itself. One of the distinctive features of Israel is its size. In fact, it is quite tiny on the world's scale. It's really only about 150 kilometers long and about 50 kilometers wide. If we look at the green that we have here that marks the vegetation, you notice around the Sea of Galilee we have a good section of green to the south of it, vegetation, and then we also have to the northeast of it. And then if we travel further down the country towards the Palestinian area, we have another sort of band of green. Now here we have some pictures of the Jezreel Valley and then looking up into Lower Galilee. Notice how lush everything is. Remember, the Jezreel Valley is one of those strategic locations. Not only does it provide food in abundance for the area, but it also is strategically important as far as transportation. If you control this valley, you control all of the northern area of Israel. This is a picture of Mount Carmel. Now remember, Mount Carmel is again very strategic because it overlooks the valley of Jezreel and also the Sharon Plain. This is kind of the hub that a lot of things rotate around. Down on the coastal plain is where you grow most of your grain crops. This is a significant area because it was often controlled by other people groups instead of Israel. If you're looking at the heartland of Israel, you will notice that it is actually quite rugged country. It's made up of hills and mountains. One of the reasons it was the heartland of Israel was because it was avoided by all the major armies going through. If you were taking a major army from, say, Egypt all the way to try to conquer areas of Assyria, you would want to travel along the easy routes, which is along the coast, and you would want to make sure that you had foraging, that you could collect all your supplies on the way. The armies didn't march like modern armies do with the supplies and rations that they took with them. They often commandeered these things as they went. You'll notice around the Dead Sea area that it is very, very dry. This is a major sort of desert area, a wilderness area. The Dead Sea doesn't provide any nourishment at all because of its high salt content. You'll also notice on the east side of the Jordan we have a sort of major plain, the Transjordan Plain. Again, this is an area that has a major highway that runs through it. Again, if you didn't want to take the coastal road, you would cross over onto the other side of the Jordan and travel up this way so you didn't have to go through mountains. Now let's look at a topological map. One of the good things about a topological map is that it shows us in very clear detail the mountains and the plains that we have in Israel. So let's look at this one here. We can notice some very, very distinct areas. We have the coastal plain, which is largely flat and quite marshy. We have the Shepland, which is sort of an intermediary zone in which it has small rolling hills but quite easy to travel. Then we move up into the main mountain range in the Central Mountains before we drop down into the Jordan Valley. Now remember, the Jordan Valley is actually below sea level, so it is quite an extreme area. Now let's look at some pictures of around the Dead Sea area. You notice how bleak everything looks. In fact, it almost looks like a moon landscape. Now the springs of En-Gedi are very close to the Dead Sea. Here's a picture of it. Now imagine what it would be like having gone through all that desert area and to finally come to something as lush and green as this. If we look to the north, we will see the valley of Jezreel. Now remember on the map that we showed you earlier, this is an area of lush green vegetation. The valley of Jezreel, not only is it flat, it provides an immense amount of food for the whole area. This is a strategic key point. If you control the valley of Jezreel, you basically control all of the northern part of Israel. Again, if you control the coastal plain, you control most of the southern region of Israel. These two areas were not conquered by the Israelites until the height of their power, under David and then Solomon. And when the armies of Egypt or Assyria or Babylon came through, they targeted these areas straight away because they knew the importance of it. Well, I hope this virtual tour has given you an appreciation of the geographical features of the larger Middle East and of Israel.